There's this incredible place in Saudi Arabia where, believe it or not, the Prophet Muhammad himself warned people never to return. Can you imagine? Today, millions of tourists flock to this valley, completely unaware of the ancient curse that hangs over it. Welcome to Al-Ula. It's like a breathtaking archaeological wonder, and it's become Saudi Arabia's shining star for tourism. You've got luxury resorts sprawling across the Golden Desert, and international celebrities snapping Instagram pics against those towering sandstone cliffs. Travel bloggers can't stop raving about the stunning rock formations, while tour guides happily led smiling families through ancient carved doorways. But hold on a second. Beneath all those glossy promotional videos and 5-star hotel reviews, there's a chilling truth that the tourism industry hopes you'll never uncover. This valley is hiding secrets that go back thousands of years, secrets so dark that when the final messenger of God passed through, he didn't even want to stop. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, and wouldn't let his companions rest. When they asked him why, his answer would haunt them forever. Let's rewind to 14 centuries ago in the scorching Arabian desert. Picture a caravan slowly making its way through endless dunes, aiming for the distant city of Thamud. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was traveling with his most trusted companions. The journey was brutal week after week under that relentless sun. Water was precious, and food was scarce. You could see the exhaustion on their faces, worn down by sand and heat. As they approached a valley nestled between those stunning red sandstone cliffs, something shifted. The barren desert suddenly transformed into something almost magical. Carved facades appeared in the rock, looking like doorways to another world. Ancient cities seemed to rise right out of the stone. The craftsmanship was jaw-dropping, and the scale was mind-blowing. This was clearly the work of a civilization far more advanced than anything these travelers had ever encountered. But as they stepped into the valley, an unsettling vibe hit them. The air felt heavy, and an eerie silence fell over the caravan. Even the camels seemed off, their usual grunts replaced by an unsettling quiet. The Prophet's expression turned serious. He pulled his garment over his head, almost like he was trying to block out something invisible yet terrifying. Local folks approached the caravan, friendly and welcoming. They offered fresh grapes, sweet and juicy, and cool water from hidden springs. The travelers were parched and starving, having survived on dates and brackish water for days. The food looked like a gift from heaven. But then, the Prophet did something that shocked everyone. He refused everything. Not a single grape, not a drop of water. He wouldn't even let his companions accept the generous hospitality. Instead, he urged them to move faster through the valley, his voice carrying an urgency they'd never heard before. His companions were baffled. This wasn't like him at all. The Prophet was known for his kindness and acceptance of hospitality, always caring for his followers' needs. Abu Bakr, his closest friend, stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "Messenger of Allah," he asked, "why do you refuse this kindness? Why won't you let us rest? We've been traveling for days." Other companions gathered around, their expressions mirroring confusion and worry. They had never seen their leader act this way. One of them pointed at the magnificent carved monuments surrounding them, saying, "This is surely a blessed place. Look at these wonders. Surely Allah has blessed this valley." The Prophet's response sent chills through the entire caravan. His voice carried a weight that felt like it came from another realm. "Never come to this valley again," he warned. "Do not enter the homes of those who wronged themselves, except while you are weeping, lest you be afflicted with what afflicted them." The companions exchanged glances, bewildered. What did he mean? Who had wronged themselves? What had happened here? Then, the Prophet spoke words that would echo through the ages. "I fear you might face the same fate as the people of Thamud." Just saying the name Thamud felt heavy, almost like a warning ringing through the valley. The companions had heard bits and pieces of ancient stories passed down through generations, but they never imagined they were standing in the very place where it all happened. The people of Thamud were a civilization so advanced, they carved entire cities into solid rock. They were so skilled that the monuments they built still stand today, defying time itself. They thought they could challenge anyone, even God. They ruled this valley, creating architectural marvels that seemed impossible for lesser civilizations. But their power turned into their downfall. Their skills became a curse, and their pride led to their destruction. Their story is a haunting reminder that no matter how advanced or powerful a civilization becomes, there are lines that should never be crossed. What happened to the people of Thamud was so catastrophic, so complete, and so terrifying that it made the Prophet of God himself refuse to even pause in their former home. The next part of this tale will uncover the chilling truth about their civilization. their defiance of divine command, and the punishment that wiped them from existence forever, leaving behind only empty tombs and whispered warnings in the desert wind. To really grasp why the Prophet Muhammad had concerns about this valley, let's rewind the clock way back, like 3,000 years before his time. We're diving into an age when the Thamud people ruled the land with a mix of power and pride that was pretty unmatched. They weren't just any ancient tribe. These folks were master architects, carving stunning palaces right into the mountainsides. Talk about talent, right? They built water systems that stood the test of time, lasting for centuries. Their craftsmanship was so intricate that even today, archaeologists are left in awe. Their civilization was so advanced that neighboring tribes whispered about them in envy. But here's the kicker: the Thamud had a major issue. They forgot the source of their strength. They lost sight of who gave them their skills. They forgot about God. In the midst of their success and arrogance, Allah sent them a messenger. Prophet Saleh, peace be upon him, was one of their own. He knew their language, customs, and lifestyle inside out. He understood their pride because he once shared it. But now, he had a message that would shake their beliefs to the core. Worship Allah alone, Saleh urged them. You have no God besides him. He created you, gave you your skills, and blessed you with this amazing valley. Stop worshipping those idols you've carved with your own hands. Your power doesn't come from yourselves. The Thamud leaders laughed him off. They pointed to their magnificent cities carved into rock faces, and their elaborate water systems that brought life to the desert. They flaunted their skilled craftsmen, thriving trade routes, and military strength. This is what our hands have built, they declared. This is what our intelligence has created. Why should we worship your invisible God when we can see the results of our own power? But Saleh didn't back down. Day after day, he wandered through their markets, sharing his message with anyone who would listen. He spoke to the stone carvers, the water engineers, and the traders loading their caravans. Some listened, and a few hearts were touched, but most were the poor and marginalized. The wealthy merchants and skilled craftsmen turned a blind eye, while the political leaders saw him as a threat to their power. If you're really a prophet, the chiefs of Thamud challenged him, prove it. Show us a miracle that'll convince us your God is real. Saleh felt the weight of their demands. He knew that miracles came with serious responsibility. If they rejected a clear sign, the consequences would be harsh. But the Thamud insisted, demanding proof. Bring us a sign, they said, and we'll believe. So, Saleh prayed, asking Allah for a miracle so undeniable that even the hardest hearts would have to believe. And Allah answered in a way that no one saw coming. There was a massive boulder in the valley, standing still for centuries. The Thamud had built their city around it, thinking it was just part of the scenery. But on that day, as Saleh stood before the crowd, something incredible happened. The boulder started to crack, not from an earthquake or anything like that, but from something stirring inside. The cracks spread like lightning, glowing with a strange light. The crowd gasped and stepped back. Even the skeptics couldn't deny what they were witnessing. Then, in a moment that defied all logic, the boulder split completely in half, and out came a creature unlike anything the Thamud had ever seen, a magnificent she-camel, her coat shining like polished silver, her eyes bright with intelligence, radiating a calmness that seemed to soothe the very air around her. The crowd stood in stunned silence. This wasn't just any camel, it was clearly a divine miracle, something no human could create. The she-camel looked at them with ancient wisdom in her eyes and walked over to the valley's spring to drink. This is your sign, Saleh announced to the amazed crowd. This she-camel is a miracle from Allah. She will live among you as proof of his power. But listen carefully, you must not harm her. Let her graze freely in Allah's earth and give her access to water. Treat her with the respect a divine sign deserves. The warning was crystal clear. The miracle was undeniable. The choice was theirs to make. For a while, it seemed like the miracle had done its job. Many of the Thamud accepted Saleh's message, starting to worship Allah alone and ditching their idols and arrogance. The she-camel became a beloved part of their community, drinking from their spring on alternate days and grazing peacefully in the valley. But the powerful among them weren't ready to let go of their pride. They watched the she-camel with growing resentment, seeing how everyone revered her. Her presence was a constant reminder that their strength came from God, not from themselves. Slowly, quietly, they began to plot against her, against the miracle that exposed their arrogance, and against the sign that threatened their authority. What they didn't realize was that they were about to cross a line from which there would be no return. The next part of this story will reveal the chilling moment when the Thamud made the decision that sealed their fate forever. The she-camel lived peacefully among the Thamud for months. Every morning, she'd stroll out from the rocky valleys where she rested, her silver coat shining bright under the desert sun. The people would watch in awe as she made her way to the spring, sipping her fill while other animals waited patiently at a distance. But something was shifting in the hearts of the Thamud elite. Instead of feeling humbled by this miracle, they were getting bitter and resentful. They saw common folks, servants and laborers beginning to follow Prophet Saleh, and that made them uneasy. Their authority was being questioned, and they felt their power slipping away because of this divine sign they couldn't control. So, 9 influential leaders of the Thamud started meeting in secret. They gathered in the shadows of their grand carved palaces, their faces twisted with jealousy and anger. These were the master builders, the wealthy merchants, and military commanders who had ruled this valley for ages. "This camel is ruining everything we've built," whispered Qda, the chief architect known for his magnificent monuments. "People look at her and forget we're the ones who craft this paradise from solid rock." Master, the richest trader, clenched his fists. "My caravans used to bring respect from far-off lands. Kings and princes sought our goods. Now, our own people care more about this animal than the empire we've created." Dab, the military commander, paced angrily. "Our warriors never feared any enemy. We conquered vast lands and defeated powerful armies. And now we're supposed to bow before a camel?" But it wasn't just about pride. The she-camel was a living reminder of their dependence on Allah. Every time they saw her, every time the people spoke of the miracle, it challenged their belief that they were the masters of their destiny. "She has to go," Qda declared. "As long as that creature lives, Saleh's influence will grow. As long as she drinks from our spring, our people will believe his God is real." Killing the she-camel wasn't a decision they could take lightly. They all knew Saleh's warning. They understood that harming her would bring divine punishment. But their arrogance had grown so vast that they convinced themselves they could handle whatever consequences might come. "We are the Thamud," Mazda reminded them. "We've survived droughts, invasions, and plagues. We've built cities that will last forever. What can one invisible god do to us that we haven't already overcome?" They spent weeks planning. They couldn't act openly. Too many people revered the she-camel. They needed to make it look like an accident or blame it on outsiders. But as they plotted, whispers of their intentions began to spread through the marketplace. Some believers, those who had accepted Saleh's message, approached him with growing concern. "Prophet of Allah," they said, "we've heard rumors. The leaders are planning something terrible. They're talking about harming the she-camel." Saleh's expression turned serious. He had been expecting this moment, dreading it. He knew his people's hearts. Their pride would ultimately overpower their fear. But he also knew what would happen if they crossed this line. He gathered the people in the main square, beneath the towering carved facades that showcased Thamud's achievements. The she-camel grazed peacefully nearby, blissfully unaware of the deadly plot forming around her. "My people," Saleh called out, his voice echoing through the crowd. "I've lived among you all my life. I've seen your greatness, your skills, your achievements. But I've also seen the darkness growing in some hearts." The 9 conspirators stood at the back of the crowd, their faces masks of false innocence. But Saleh's next words seemed to pierce right through them. "The she-camel is a trust from Allah. She's a test of your obedience, a measure of your faith. Those who think to harm her are inviting destruction not just upon themselves, but upon this entire civilization." He pointed to the magnificent buildings surrounding them, the intricate water systems, and the bustling markets that represented generations of Thamud achievement. "All of this, every carved stone, every channel of water, every thread of fabric in your markets exists because Allah willed it. He gave you hands to carve, minds to plan, strength to build, but he can take it all away in an instant." The crowd murmured uneasily. Some nodded in agreement, but others shifted uncomfortably. The prosperity they enjoyed was real. The power they wielded was tangible. It was hard to believe that an invisible god could threaten what their own hands had built. Saleh's voice grew more urgent. "I warn you one final time. Harm the she-camel, and you will have 3 days to prepare for your end. 3 days before Allah's punishment descends upon this valley. 3 days before everything you've built becomes nothing but ruins and memories." The crowd dispersed slowly, people whispering among themselves as they returned to their homes and businesses. But the 9 leaders stayed behind, their resolve only strengthened by Saleh's warning. "Did you hear him?" Qda laughed bitterly. 3 days of punishment? We've faced 3 years of drought and survived. We've endured 3 decades of tribal wars and come out stronger. 3 days means nothing to us. That night, they made their final preparations. They chose their moment carefully, a morning when the she-camel would be alone at the spring, when most people would be busy with their daily tasks.
They gathered their weapons, their courage boosted by mutual encouragement and shared delusion.
But one among them hesitated.
Shihab, the youngest of the conspirators, had been having second thoughts.
As dawn approached, as the moment of action drew near, his hands began to shake.
Maybe we should reconsider, he whispered to Kuda. What if Saleh is right? What if there really will be consequences?
Kuda's eyes blazed with determination.
If you're too weak to do what needs to be done, then stay behind.
But don't try to stop us.
This is bigger than your fear. As the sun rose over the valley, painting the carved facades in brilliant gold and red, the she-camel made her way to the spring, just like she had every morning for months. She moved with the same peaceful grace, the same trusting innocence. She had no idea this would be her last sunrise.
The 9 men emerged from their hiding place, weapons raised, hearts hardened by months of resentment and jealousy.
In that moment, they weren't just attacking a miraculous camel. They were declaring war against Allah himself.
What happened next would be remembered for thousands of years as one of the most catastrophic mistakes in human history.
The next part of this story will reveal the horrifying consequences of their choice, and why the Prophet Muhammad himself refused to even pause in this cursed valley. The attack was swift and brutal.
The 9 conspirators surrounded the she-camel as she drank peacefully at the spring. She looked up at them with those ancient, knowing eyes, as if understanding what was about to happen.
But she didn't run.
She didn't resist. Divine creatures don't flee from the destiny that Allah has written. Kuda raised his sword first.
The blade gleamed in the morning sun as it came down, striking the miraculous creature that had emerged from solid stone. The she-camel let out a single, haunting cry that echoed through the entire valley. It wasn't just the sound of an animal in pain. It was the sound of a miracle being destroyed, the sound of divine mercy being rejected. The other conspirators joined in the attack, their weapons flashing as they struck again and again.
Within moments, the creature that had been a sign of Allah's power lay motionless beside the spring.
Her silver coat was stained with blood.
Her peaceful presence was gone forever.
For a moment, the 9 men stood in silence, breathing heavily from their exertion. They looked down at what they had done, and for just an instant, doubt flickered in their eyes.
But then Kuda straightened his shoulders and declared, "It's finished. Now we can return to the way things were." But nothing would ever be the same again. News of the she-camel's death spread through the valley like wildfire. People came running from their homes, their workshops, their fields.
They gathered around the spring, staring in horror at the lifeless body of the miracle they had learned to love. Women wept openly.
Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer.
Even some of the conspirators' own families looked at them with shock and fear. Prophet Saleh arrived to find the crowd in chaos.
He pushed through the gathering people until he saw the she-camel's body. His face went pale. His hands trembled.
This was the moment he had dreaded, the moment he had tried so desperately to prevent.
He knelt beside the miraculous creature, placing his hand gently on her still form. Then he stood and faced the crowd, his voice heavy with grief and terrible knowledge. "You have killed El she-camel," he announced, his words carrying across the silent valley.
"The sign he gave you to guide you to truth. You have destroyed out of arrogance and jealousy." The conspirators stood defiantly in the crowd. Even now, even with the evidence of their crime before them, they showed no remorse.
Kuda stepped forward, his chin raised in stubborn pride. "We are the masters of this valley," he declared. "We built these cities. We created this prosperity. We don't need signs from invisible gods to tell us how to live." Saleh looked at him with infinite sadness.
"Then you have chosen your fate.
3 days. You have 3 days to prepare for what is coming."
Some in the crowd gasped. Others laughed nervously.
3 days?
What could happen in 3 days? They were the mighty Thamud.
Their cities were carved from solid rock. Their civilization had lasted for centuries.
Surely they could survive whatever punishment this prophet's God might send. But Saleh's next words chilled them to the bone. "On the first day, your faces will turn yellow like the color of gold. On the second day, they will turn red like blood. On the third day, they will turn black like coal." And then, his voice broke with emotion, "and then Allah's punishment will come, and not one of you will survive." The crowd began to murmur uneasily. Some started to leave, unwilling to hear more.
But others stayed, torn between disbelief and growing fear. Yellow faces,
red faces,
black faces.
It sounded like madness.
But then again, they had just witnessed the murder of a camel that had emerged from solid stone.
Saleh gathered the believers, those who had accepted his message and mourned the she-camel's death.
"Come," he told them quietly. "We must leave this valley immediately.
Allah's mercy extends to those who believed, but his punishment will fall on this entire land.
As night fell on that first day, and strange unease settled over the Thamud, people went to bed nervous, unsettled, but still convinced that their prophet was wrong. Their cities were too strong. Their civilization was too advanced.
Whatever was coming, they would face it as they had faced every other challenge. But when they woke up the next morning, everything changed. The first person to notice was a water carrier named Hamad.
He was drawing water from the well when he caught sight of his reflection in the bucket. He dropped the rope in shock. His face, which had been its normal brown color when he went to sleep, was now a sickly, unnatural yellow. He ran to his neighbor's house, pounding on the door. When his friend Yazir answered, Hamad's mouth fell open. Yazir's face was the same terrifying yellow color.
They stared at each other in growing horror. Within an hour, the entire valley was in chaos. Every person, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, had woken up with faces the color of gold.
The conspirators ran to their polished bronze mirrors, staring at their transformed reflections in disbelief.
This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real.
But it was only the beginning. Qur'an gathered the other conspirators in his palace, their yellow faces twisted with fear and anger.
This is some kind of trick, he insisted, though his voice shook as he spoke.
Saleh has poisoned our water, or cast some spell. This isn't divine punishment.
This is human deception, Mustard paced frantically around the room. But how?
How could he change every face in the valley?
How could he reach into our very homes while we slept? Dab, the military commander, tried to maintain his composure.
We still have 2 days. We'll find Saleh. We'll make him reverse whatever he's done. We'll force him to. His words were cut off by a commotion outside. People were running through the streets, shouting and crying.
Some of the conspirators rushed to the windows to see what was happening. In the distance, they could see Prophet Saleh and his followers leaving the valley. The small group moved slowly across the desert, their figures growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared beyond the horizon. They were abandoning the Thamud to their fate.
As the sun set on that first day, painting the sky the same sickly yellow as their faces, the people of Thamud finally began to understand the magnitude of what they had done. They had killed a miracle.
They had rejected divine mercy, and now they were facing the consequences. But the worst was yet to come.
Tomorrow would bring the second day, and with it, a new and more terrifying transformation.
The next part of this story will reveal the final countdown to destruction, and the moment when the mightiest civilization of its time learned that no earthly power can stand against the wrath of Allah. The second day dawned with an ominous crimson sky, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. The people of Thamud woke up hoping desperately that their yellow faces had been just a nightmare. But when they looked in their mirrors, the horror was still there. If anything, it had gotten worse. The sickly yellow color had deepened overnight, taking on an almost metallic sheen that made them look like living statues cast in tarnished gold.
Children cried when they saw their own reflections. Mothers wept as they looked at their transformed families.
But the worst part wasn't how they looked.
It was the growing certainty that Saleh's prophecy was coming true, word by terrifying word. Throughout the morning, people gathered in small groups, whispering fearfully about what would happen next.
If the first day had brought yellow faces, and Saleh had said the second day would bring red faces, then what did that mean? How much worse could this get? They didn't have to wait long to find out.
Around midday, a young woman named Alula was washing clothes by the spring where the she-camel had been murdered.
She bent down to scrub a stain when suddenly she felt dizzy.
The world seemed to spin around her.
She reached up to steady herself, her hand touching her cheek, and felt something warm and wet.
When she pulled her hand away, her palm was covered in blood.
But it wasn't blood from a wound. Her face itself was bleeding, as if her very skin was transforming from within.
She ran to the nearest house, screaming for help, and within minutes the entire valley knew that the second transformation had begun.
One by one, like a plague spreading through the population, the yellow color began to change. It started as small patches of red, like drops of blood appearing on golden skin.
Then the patches spread, merged, deepened.
Within hours, every face in the valley had turned the color of fresh blood. The conspirators tried desperately to maintain some sense of control. Qur'an called an emergency meeting of the city leaders, but when they gathered in his great hall, they looked like demons from some nightmare realm.
Their blood-red faces were twisted with fear and rage. They struggled to deny what was happening to them.
This has to stop, Mazda declared, his red face gleaming with sweat. There has to be a way to reverse this. We're the Thamud. We don't bow to threats from desert prophets.
But even as he spoke, his voice carried a tremor that betrayed his terror. Deep down, all of them were beginning to understand the truth.
They weren't facing some human trick or natural phenomenon. This was divine judgment, and it was beyond their power to stop. Dab, the military commander, had spent the day trying to organize some kind of defense.
"We have the finest warriors in Arabia," he insisted.
"We have walls that have never been breached, weapons that have never failed us. Whatever comes tomorrow, we'll be ready. But how do you fight against God himself?
How do you build walls high enough to keep out divine wrath? How do you forge weapons strong enough to battle the creator of the universe?" As the second day wore on, something else began to happen.
The magnificent buildings that had been the pride of the Thamud started to show signs of strain. Tiny cracks appeared in the carved facades.
The intricate water systems began to malfunction. It was as if the very foundations of their civilization were beginning to crumble. Some of the people tried to flee. Families loaded their camels with their most precious possessions and attempted to leave the valley.
But something stopped them at the borders of their territory.
An invisible force, a wall of divine will that prevented anyone from escaping their fate.
They were trapped in the valley that had been their paradise, now becoming their prison. Others tried to reach out to Prophet Saleh, sending messengers across the desert to beg for his intercession. But the messengers returned with devastating news. Saleh would not return. He had warned them repeatedly. He had begged them to listen.
Now it was too late for mercy. As night fell on the second day, the people of Thamud gathered in their homes, their blood-red faces reflecting the flickering light of oil lamps. Parents held their children close, trying to comfort them despite their own terror. Husbands and wives whispered desperate prayers to gods they had ignored for generations.
But the 9 conspirators who had started this catastrophe remained defiant even now.
They met one final time in Keda's palace, their red faces making them look like beings from the depths of hell itself. "Tomorrow is the third day," Keda announced, his voice hoarse but still filled with stubborn pride.
"Even if our faces turn black as Saleh predicted, we'll survive.
We always have.
The Thamud don't break. We don't surrender." But Shihab, the youngest of the conspirators, finally broke.
The weight of what they had done, the horror of what was coming, crashed down on him all at once. "Don't you understand?" he screamed at the others. "We killed a miracle. We murdered a sign from Allah himself.
This isn't about pride anymore. This is about divine justice, and we can't fight it." The others stared at him in shock.
Shihab had been with them from the beginning, had helped plan the Shikamel's murder. But now his red face was streaked with tears as the full magnitude of their crime finally hit him. "I tried to warn you," he continued, his voice breaking. "I had doubts. I knew something terrible would happen.
But you wouldn't listen."
"None of you would listen." Keda's red face twisted with rage. "Coward."
"Even now, when we need unity, you betray us with your weakness." But Shihab was beyond caring about their anger.
"Look at us,"
he shouted.
"Look at what we've become. We're not human anymore. We're marked for destruction. And tomorrow," his voice trailed off into horrified silence.
Tomorrow would bring the third day, black faces, and then the end. As the second day finally ended, the people of Thamud tried to sleep, but few managed more than a few hours of fitful rest.
They tossed and turned, their blood-red faces pressed against pillows that would soon be stained with something far worse than sweat and tears. Outside, the wind began to howl through the valley with a sound unlike anything they had ever heard. It wasn't the normal desert wind that they knew so well.
This was something different, something that seemed to carry voices from beyond the mortal world. Voices of judgment, voices of wrath, voices that whispered of the terrible dawn that was coming. The third day was about to begin,
and with it would come the final transformation, the last warning before Allah's ultimate punishment descended upon the valley.
The next part of this story will reveal the horrifying climax of the Thamud's destruction, and why this valley remained cursed for thousands of years until the Prophet Muhammad himself warned against ever returning. The third day arrived without a sunrise. The sky remained dark, as if the sun itself refused to witness what was about to unfold.
The people of Thamud woke in the pure dawn darkness to discover that the final transformation had already begun while they slept. Their blood-red faces were turning black,
not the warm brown of desert dwellers, but a terrifying, unnatural black that seemed to absorb light itself. It was the color of death, of endings, of divine wrath made visible.
Children screamed when they saw their parents. Parents wept when they looked at their children. The entire valley echoed with cries of horror and despair. But this time, the transformation was different. It wasn't just their faces changing color. Their entire bodies began to feel heavy, sluggish, as if they were slowly turning to stone.
Some people found they could barely move.
Others discovered that their voices were failing, their words coming out as whispers and croaks. The conspirators gathered one last time, but they were barely recognizable as human beings.
Their black faces made them look like shadows of their former selves, like spirits of the damned walking among the living. Even their stubborn pride was finally cracking under the weight of supernatural terror. "What have we done?" Shihab moaned, his voice barely audible. "What have we brought upon our people?"
But it was Qda who spoke the words that revealed the full horror of their situation. As he tried to stand, he stumbled and fell.
When the others helped him up, they realized with growing panic that his body was becoming stiff, rigid. He was literally turning to stone.
"I can't move my legs," he whispered, his black face twisted with terror.
"I can't feel my hands."
"It's like my body is dying while my mind is still alive." The transformation was accelerating.
Across the valley, people were discovering the same horrifying reality.
They weren't just changing color.
They were being turned into statues, preserved forever in their final moments of terror and regret. Some tried to run, but their legs moved like they were walking through thick mud.
Others attempted to call out for help, but their voices were fading to nothing.
The mighty Thamud, who had carved cities from solid rock, were themselves becoming rock. As the morning progressed without any sign of the sun, an otherworldly silence began to fall over the valley. The usual sounds of daily life, children playing, merchants calling out their wares, craftsmen working at their trades, all gradually faded away. In their place came an oppressive quiet that pressed down on the valley like a weight.
Then, around midday, they heard it.
A sound from the heavens unlike anything that had ever existed on earth. It wasn't thunder, though it was louder than the mightiest storm. It wasn't wind, though it seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was a voice.
A divine voice.
An angelic cry that shattered the very foundations of reality. The Archangel Jibreel, peace be upon him, had been commanded by Allah to deliver the final judgment.
His voice, when it came, wasn't heard by human ears.
It was felt in the soul, experienced in the very core of existence. It was the sound of divine justice being executed, of cosmic law being enforced. Allahu Akbar. The cry echoed through dimensions beyond human understanding.
Allah is greatest.
The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Every living thing in the valley of Thamud died in that moment. Not gradually, not with suffering, but instantly and completely. The black-faced people, already half turned to stone, became perfect statues in their final poses.
Some were reaching out to loved ones they would never touch again. Others were looking skyward, as if hoping for mercy that would never come. Still others were frozen in the act of running, their stone feet forever planted in the desert sand.
But it wasn't just the people. Every animal in the valley, the camels, the goats, the birds, even the insects, all perished in that single divine instant. The plants withered.
The springs dried up. The very air itself seemed to die, leaving behind only the silence of absolute destruction.
The magnificent carved cities remained, but they were now empty tombs. The elaborate water systems still functioned mechanically, but there was no one left to use them. The marketplaces stood ready for commerce that would never resume. The homes waited for families that would never return. Prophet Saleh and his followers, safe in their distant location, felt the earth tremble beneath their feet as Allah's judgment fell upon the valley.
They knew, without needing to see, that the Thamud were no more.
The civilization that had lasted for centuries, that had seemed so permanent and powerful, had been erased from existence in a single moment. But the story doesn't end with destruction.
It ends with a warning that would echo through time.
When the divine cry faded and silence returned to the earth, something remained in that valley.
Something invisible but undeniable.
A spiritual presence that marked this place as cursed, as forbidden, as a monument to the consequences of rejecting divine guidance.
Years passed.
Decades.
Centuries. Other tribes would approach the valley, drawn by stories of the magnificent ruins and the treasures that might be hidden there.
But something always stopped them from settling permanently.
Travelers reported feeling watched by unseen eyes.
Merchants spoke of hearing whispers in the wind, voices that seemed to warn them away. The carved facades began to weather and crack, but they never completely crumbled. They stood as eternal reminders of a civilization that had possessed everything: skill, power, wealth, time, but had lost it all because they forgot the source of their blessings. Some tribes tried to use the ancient water systems, but the water always tasted bitter, wrong.
Others attempted to live in the carved homes, but their sleep was disturbed by dreams of black-faced figures reaching out in eternal desperation.
The valley seemed to reject any attempt at new habitation, as if it were reserved forever as a memorial to divine justice.
And then, 14 centuries after the destruction of the Thamud, a caravan passed through this cursed valley.
The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, looked upon the ruins with knowledge that went beyond history books or tribal legends.
He saw not just empty buildings, but the spiritual reality of what had happened here. He felt the weight of divine judgment that still hung over this place like an invisible cloud. That's why he refused the grapes and water. That's why he covered his face and hurried his companions through the valley. That's why he warned them never to return.
He understood what tourists and archaeologists today cannot see, that some places carry the mark of Allah's wrath so deeply that they remain dangerous to the soul itself.
The final part of this story will reveal the chilling truth about what this means for modern visitors to Al-Ula and why the Prophet's warning remains as relevant today as it was 14 centuries ago.
Today, millions of people visit Alula every year. They come from around the world, drawn by stunning photographs of carved rock facades and promises of luxury desert experiences. They pose for Instagram photos in front of the very tombs where the Thamud once lived. They walk through the same valleys where divine judgment once fell like thunder, but they have no idea what they're really walking through. The tourism industry has transformed Al-Ula into Saudi Arabia's crown jewel destination. 5-star resorts offer glamping experiences under the desert stars. Tour guides lead groups through the ancient sites, explaining the architectural techniques and historical significance. Archaeologists study the intricate carvings, marveling at the advanced engineering of the water systems. But none of them mention the Prophet's warning. None of them speak about the spiritual danger that still lingers in this place. None of them understand that they re-promoting tourism to a valley that the final messenger of God himself refused to enter. The disconnect is staggering. The same carved facades that tourists admire today are the monuments built by people who rejected Allah's guidance. The same springs where visitors now stop to rest are the places where a miraculous she-camel once drank before being murdered by arrogant hands. The same peaceful valleys where luxury resorts now operate are the sites where an entire civilization was erased from existence in a single, divine moment. But here's what's even more disturbing. Many of the strange incidents that visitors report are dismissed as imagination or natural phenomena. Tourists speak of feeling inexplicably uneasy in certain areas. Some report hearing sounds that can't be explained, whispers in the wind, footsteps on empty paths, voices calling from nowhere. Hotel staff at the luxury resorts often mention that guests complain of disturbing dreams when staying overnight in the valley. Dreams of figures with changing faces, yellow, then red, then black. Dreams of hearing a terrible cry that seems to come from the sky itself. Dreams so vivid and terrifying that some visitors cut their trip short and leave immediately. Photography equipment malfunctions in certain locations for no technical reason. Cameras stop working at specific spots, then function perfectly again once visitors move away. Some photographers report that their images of certain carved facades come out distorted, showing shadows that weren't visible to the naked eye. Tour guides, especially those who have worked in the area for years, often speak quietly among themselves about areas they prefer to avoid during certain times of day. They talk about sections of the archaeological site where groups become strangely silent and subdued. They mention spots where even the most talkative tourists suddenly stop speaking and hurry to move on. But the most unsettling reports come from overnight visitors. Those who stay in the valley after dark, whether in luxury hotels or camping under the stars, describe a quality of silence unlike anywhere else on earth. It's not the peaceful quiet of the desert. It's an oppressive, heavy silence that seems to press down on you, making it difficult to breathe normally. Some visitors report waking up in the middle of the night with an overwhelming urge to leave immediately. They describe feeling watched by unseen eyes, sensing a presence that fills them with inexplicable dread. Many pack up their belongings and drive away in the darkness, able to explain their actions to confused family members or travel companions. The scientific community dismisses these reports as psychological phenomena. They explain the unease as natural human response to isolation in unfamiliar environments. They attribute the equipment malfunctions to sand, heat, and electromagnetic fields in the rock formations. They suggest that the disturbing dreams are caused by subconscious awareness of the site's history of conflict and abandonment. But what if there's another explanation? What if the Prophet Muhammad's warning wasn't just about respecting historical sites or avoiding bad luck? What if he understood something about this place that modern science cannot measure or explain? Islamic scholars who are familiar with the authentic reports about the Prophet's journey through Al-Ula take a very different view of modern tourism there. They point out that the Prophet's warning was not casual advice. It was a serious, spiritual caution from someone who had direct knowledge of Allah's judgment. The Prophet didn't just suggest that people might want to avoid the area. He explicitly told his companions never to return. He wouldn't let them eat or drink anything from the valley. He covered his face and urged them to move quickly through the region. These weren't the actions of someone who was merely respecting a historical site. According to Islamic teaching, places where divine punishment has fallen carry a spiritual weight that doesn't disappear with time. The physical destruction may have ended thousands of years ago, but the spiritual reality of Allah's judgment remains. The valley is marked forever as a place where divine mercy was rejected and divine justice was executed. This doesn't mean that everyone who visits Alula will face immediate harm. Allah's mercy is vast and his wisdom is perfect. But it does suggest that treating this place as a casual tourist destination, promoting it for entertainment and luxury experiences, shows a dangerous ignorance of its true nature. The contrast between modern tourism and prophetic guidance couldn't be more stark. Where the tourism industry sees opportunity for profit and pleasure, the Prophet saw spiritual danger requiring urgent avoidance. Where archaeologists see historical curiosity deserving study and preservation, Islamic tradition sees a divinely marked zone requiring respectful distance. Some Muslim visitors to Al-Ula report feeling conflicted about their presence there. They're drawn by the stunning beauty and historical significance, but troubled by awareness of the Prophet's warning. They wonder whether modern tourism to the site represents a form of collective forgetfulness about divine judgment and prophetic guidance. Others argue that visiting Alula can serve as a powerful reminder of the consequences of arrogance and rejection of divine guidance. As long as visitors approach with proper awareness and respect, rather than treating it as merely another Instagram destination. But regardless of individual interpretations, one fact remains undeniable. Millions of people are now regularly visiting a place that the final messenger of Allah explicitly warned against entering. They're sleeping in valleys where divine wrath once fell. They're drinking from springs where a miraculous sign of Allah was murdered. They're re-celebrating and taking pleasure in a location that stands as an eternal monument to the dangers of forgetting God. The final part of this story will explore what this means for us today, and why the ancient warning of a desert prophet might be more relevant in our modern world than we ever imagined.
The story of Al-Ula forces us to confront an uncomfortable question in our rush to embrace modern tourism and archaeological discovery. Have we forgotten the wisdom of ancient warnings?
Have we become so confident in our scientific understanding that we dismiss spiritual realities we cannot measure?
The Thamud believed they were invincible.
They looked at their carved cities, their advanced engineering, their military might, and concluded that they were self-made masters of their destiny. They saw no need to humble themselves before an invisible God. They had concrete evidence of their own power.
What could faith possibly add to what they had already achieved?
Sound familiar?
Today's world operates on remarkably similar assumptions. We trust in our technology, our scientific methods, our economic systems.
We build gleaming cities that reach toward the sky. We create networks that connect the entire globe instantly.
We develop medicine that conquers diseases and machines that think like humans. But like the Thamud, we often forget the source of our abilities. We forget that every discovery, every innovation, every breakthrough builds upon natural laws and capacities that we didn't create. We mistake being able to understand and manipulate the world for being able to control ultimate reality itself. The Thamud carved monuments from solid rock and thought they had mastered nature. We manipulate genes and split atoms and think we have mastered creation. The Thamud built water systems that lasted centuries and believed they had secured their future. We build global supply chains and financial networks and believe we have secured our prosperity. But the fundamental question remains the same. What happens when a civilization becomes so confident in its own power that it forgets its dependence on forces beyond its control? The destruction of the Thamud wasn't just ancient history. It was a template, a warning, a mirror held up to every civilization that would come after. It shows us what happens when technological advancement is separated from spiritual wisdom, when skill is divorced from humility, when power grows without accountability to higher authority.
Consider the parallels more carefully.
The Thamud were masters of architecture and engineering. We are masters of technology and industry.
They carved permanent monuments in stone. We built permanent networks in digital space. They controlled water in the desert. We control information across the globe.
They were offered a divine sign, a miraculous she-camel that emerged from solid rock. We have been offered divine guidance through scripture, through prophets, through the natural order that reveals divine design at every level from subatomic particles to galactic clusters. The Thamud's leaders rejected the sign because it challenged their authority and exposed their dependence on Allah.
Our leaders often reject divine guidance because it challenges their autonomy and exposes our dependence on forces beyond human control. The 9 conspirators who killed the she-camel weren't motivated by ignorance.
They understood exactly what they were doing.
They made a calculated decision that preserving their power and pride was worth risking divine punishment.
They gambled that their civilization was strong enough to withstand whatever consequences might come.
How many decisions in our modern world follow the same logic? How often do we choose short-term gain over long-term wisdom? How frequently do we prioritize human ambition over divine command? How regularly do we bet that our technology and systems are robust enough to handle whatever consequences our choices might produce?
The Thamud had 3 days of warning, 3 days to reconsider, to repent, to change course.
They watched their faces turn yellow, then red, then black, and still refused to acknowledge their error. Even when confronted with supernatural evidence of divine displeasure, they clung to their pride and their illusions of control.
Today's warning signs might be less dramatic, but no less real.
Climate change that follows exactly the patterns scientists have been predicting for decades.
Economic inequality that grows despite unprecedented global wealth. Political polarization that threatens the stability of democratic societies.
Mental health crises that proliferate alongside technological advancement. These aren't necessarily signs of immediate divine punishment, but they are indicators that something fundamental is out of balance. They suggest that purely human solutions, no matter how sophisticated, may not be sufficient for the challenges we face.
The Prophet Muhammad's warning about Al-Ula wasn't just about one cursed valley in the Arabian desert.
It was about the spiritual principle that places where divine judgment has fallen carry lasting significance. It was about the importance of remembering what happens when civilizations forget their place in the cosmic order, when we turn sites of divine judgment into tourist destinations, when we treat warnings from prophets as historical curiosities, when we approach places of spiritual significance with purely secular perspectives. We risk repeating the fundamental error of the Thamud,
forgetting that there are realities beyond what we can measure and control. This doesn't mean that all technology is evil, or that progress is inherently dangerous. The Thamud's skills in architecture and engineering were gifts from Allah. The problem wasn't their abilities, but their attitude toward those abilities. They forgot gratitude.
They abandoned humility. They replaced worship of their creator with worship of their creation. The warning of Al-Ula is ultimately a warning about the destination of human pride.
It reminds us that no matter how advanced our civilizations become, no matter how impressive our achievements, no matter how secure our position seems, we remain dependent on forces beyond our control.
We remain accountable to standards beyond our invention. We remain subject to judgment beyond our appeal.
The carved facades of Al-Ula still stand today, withered but not destroyed. They serve as eternal reminders of what human skill can achieve and what human arrogance can lose.
They are monuments to both the potential and the peril of civilization itself. Every visitor who walks through those ancient streets, every tourist who poses for photos in front of those carved tombs, every archaeologist who studies those water systems is walking through a lesson written in stone. The question is whether we have the wisdom to read what it says.
The Thamud thought they were too advanced to fall, too skilled to fail,
too powerful to face consequences for their choices.
History proved them wrong in the most dramatic way possible.
The question that remains for us is simple. Will we learn from their example, or will we repeat their mistake? The choice, as always, is ours.
But the warning echoes through time, as relevant today as it was when a prophet first spoke it in the shadow of carved mountains. Some achievements aren't worth the price. Some pride leads to destruction, and some valleys are best left alone.